So, welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Hossein Sadeghi-Movahed. I will be talking a little bit of my experience on conducting a form of Photovoice methodology in my research that I've conducted in during my EdD studies at Oxford Brookes University. It does focus on some of the lived experience of dyslexic students. I put it into some kind of context and we can discuss it later on and have a little more questions when we stop the recording, and we can explore to a lot of the areas that I might not have gone to depth enough during my presentation, and it would be lovely to hear from you guys and explore it further. But in terms of what I'm going to be talking about is some of that methodological kind of approach that I've had into my research and how I have used it to conduct research with dyslexic students. In terms of positionality and make it explicit to you guys, I am dyslexic myself, and I was diagnosed as dyslexic before I conduct this research. So it was kind of a little bit personal and making me as an insider, outsider kind of researcher. But also before I embark in this research, I have been working at the university for a number of years, and fortunately their subject coordinator, as we call it at Oxford Brookes University, for an MSc course that we have in architectural school. The reason I'm highlighting that is because a lot of the things that I've been teaching or working and exploring, researching is a lot more science-based, and a lot more in terms of the, in terms of the position that the knowledge should be explored was on the post-positivist kind of approach, a lot more living on the one truth rather than truths, and when I started my journey to do my EdD studies, a lot of these had evolved and changed as I started to take this journey. One of those kind of evolution into my approach was my exposure to critical theory and some of the work that is being done in Frankfurt School, and specifically a lot of the work that is being conducted by Fourier. His work became very kind of center of my interest, and I became a lot more familiar with some of the things he had done, especially his book, probably arguably one of the most famous book that he's got, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I've read that, and I became very interested to adjust my approach not only on my pedagogical kind of practice, but also in terms of my the way that I would like to go about researching and exploring knowledge, and how it should be kind of approached and looking at from the individual perspective rather than looking at some of the approach that I had previously. So I became very interested in his emancipatory kind of approach on the pedagogical level, but also in terms of research, and I would link it a little bit as we go through my presentation. So saying that there was a kind of revolution, as I call it, as I define it within myself, and how I try to come to term in terms of this change, and then looking at my methodology and how I would be exploring the knowledge through a different lens and different approach, and how I would put the human center into my research. So I became a lot more aligned in terms of constructivist kind of paradigm, and how I would have liked to explore knowledge. And I've highlighted some of my positionality on the bottom of this image, and how I would have liked to do my theoretical perspective and methodological bit. And I became a lot more familiar with some of the things that I would be concentrating today in terms of the methodological approach, in terms of Photovoice. And I call it a little bit adapted, and how I've changed it and tailored it to my need during this research. But I would touch on Photovoice a lot more and how it was developed and how it's evolved in my research. So I became a lot interested, as it was very personal kind of area of interest in terms of students with neurodivergent background. And I know the knowledge is advancing a lot in this area due to nature of the importance that is being given, and the regulation is consequently being changed, and the number of students has been increasing. So it's a lot of interest and area for research on that day. But probably a lot of the research that I came across, and still is the case, the way that the research is conducted involving the students or participants with neurodivergent backgrounds are more traditional approaches, and whether it is interview or focus groups, or maybe it is written survey. So I wanted to explore some of the different ways of engaging with the student with dyslexia and neurodivergent background. So therefore, I wanted to choose a different methodological approach that is probably a bit more suited to this approach, and hence the reason I basically explore Photovoice as my way forward in conducting research, because I thought probably dyslexic students find writing, reading more challenging, and if I ask them to participate in my research and ask them to write and read a lot more, that would not be the best probably approach to generate my data and collect further data and to be able to advance that area. So talking about Photovoice, that coming to that, and a little bit highlighting some of the things that's been done. Probably arguably a lot of the Photovoice is being influenced by the work of Freire, and is built upon that, inspired by that. And Freire was a believer that the images can tell a lot of stories and can advocate critical thinking and the ownership and the change that is required and action that is required, and be an emancipatory approach. He wanted to make it, more empowerment of the participants. But of course, his work is on a lot more on the focuses on pedagogical kind of practice, and rather than research, but influences a lot of the relation that it is empowered through the Photovoice approach. Photovoice is kind of also highlights that kind of power relation between the researcher and the participants, that you could argue that is an uncomfortable kind of power relation, and that the researcher is in charge of it, and the participants are kind of probably a little bit influenced or led by that as they participate in the research. So therefore, during the 90s, Wang and Boris developed Photovoice as a means of overcoming a lot of this uncomfortable relation, and a little bit also probably influenced by phenomenology and those kind of approaches towards conducting knowledge. So they wanted to basically create something that it creates more community action, change, reaching the policymakers. So they developed this Photovoice by some of the work they did in rural China, involving Chinese female workers within that community, ask them to go and photograph their community and bring it and discuss it, and impact and influence the policymakers. At that time, obviously, those times, the use of camera and photographs were a lot less advanced and less available as what we have now, on our tip of our fingers as smartphones or this kind of ability. So they were like using the disposable cameras, teaching them how to use it, go and photograph it, bring it, develop it, discuss it, and really influence a change. But of course, a lot has changed since then, and they kind of didn't make it a very specific kind of criteria, and they designed some flexibility in using Photovoice. And that is what I have been using, and use that flexibility and advancement in technology and our approach to conducting research in 21st century. And a little bit going further, so I know that photograph in any image is probably very easy for a lot of the participants these days, as almost every single mobile phone has camera inbuilt into it, but also the digital ability of a lot of the participants, especially in higher education, is a lot more advanced. And on the other hand, probably the participant in my research, as they class themselves a lot more graphically more capable, and find the images and constructing images, creating these images a lot more in their comfort zone. So I asked them that to construct their images, and I call it constructing. So they basically they're constructing an image that they have thought about it. They decide what they would like to include in it, and they had time to construct these images and add some captions to it, which is their voice into it, and really decide what they would like to share with us. And then come to a discussion sessions, and whether it was individual due to, arrangement within the timing or preference, or in the small group discussions. And the researcher, in this case, myself, playing the role as a facilitator rather than really asking any question or really engaging with the participant. So they would come and share the constructed images using a Zoom platform similar to what the session that we are having today. And they would be basically, and of course, since the past COVID, is this digital ability and using Zoom or any of these platforms become a lot more common and easy for participants, but also added a lot of other benefits, if you like, because they could, turn the cameras off, as what we've done here, if they chose to do so. They could leave at any time if they felt that they would not like to participate any further. And it added some of those kind of flexibility, and the location. They could they could join the session at any location that they preferred, at the comfort of their own safe area zone, if you like. And so they would come and share the images on a screen share, similar to what I'm doing now. And they would just discuss what they decided, thought about it, and put into the image to come and discuss. Of course, that discussion, is led by them. So that I call it as a participant-led discussion sessions. And me was just acting as a facilitator, and really with the minimum interference with what they wanted to do, and just perhaps welcoming them, making sure that they have their pseudonym assigned and change the name, and then we will start the recording. And then I use the recording for the transcribing the session later on, and using for my coding and making my things at the later stage. But they could just go through the images, talk about it, whether it was one image or further, and they would discuss it and share what they would prefer to share. But also it's got that kind of ability to think about the phenomenon and really decide what you would like to share. And there's no pressure on it at what, the question is not being asked, and it's really up to them what they would have liked to share with me during the sessions. The sessions were about 20 minutes to an hour in maximum. We allowed an hour as a maximum to not really put pressure on the participation. And we thought that is probably beneficial to them because they reflect on it and think about it beforehand and really value their time during the session. Because as some of the participants highlighted, they had never even thought about it before. And some of these areas, they had never even discussed it with anybody else before. So it kind of added that kind of value to them to come and think about it, share it, and discuss it with me during the discussion session. It is probably important to highlight that the images are like part of that conversation, and this is what they decided to share. As I go through my presentation, you see some of the images that I have shared. And part of this presentation, these are all constructed by the participants, and in a very diverse way. So they a lot of them didn't use photograph and use that kind of drawing or collage or really writing the things, as you can see in this image, that how they felt and the phenomena they wanted to share, that lived experience of them, in terms of how they find this process. And I'll go through a little bit more detail of what I asked them in a second. But I didn't use the images to probably analyze the images, which probably as is done in other ways. The image is just the catalyst of the conversation and accompanies the data after the discussion sessions. And I use some of those images to make my themes rather than any analysis added to it. So the question that I asked the students and the participants was that they share their experience of receiving written feedback on their summative written assignment. In a specific, it's got a couple of areas that I emphasize on it, is written feedback on the summative written assignments. So that summative bit is the accountability and that kind of pressure that probably they put on themselves or the system that is required to pass the module. And also the written side of it, that they might have probably struggled as it comes part of being dyslexic. And then receiving written feedback, then that they need to read it and reflect on it, so that there were different layers of probably challenges that I expected that they would have to overcome. But of course, I'm a little bit focusing on some of the things that I've done in terms of the methodology and not necessarily the research outcome. You can ask me later on a little bit some of those things. But interesting, a lot of the participants highlighted that they wouldn't have thought about this, or they wouldn't have discussed this about with any other person, or that putting in an image, it triggered a lot of more kind of depth and thinking about it, and make it very personal. Some other participants really enjoyed the discussion sessions, and as they were talking about it and going through a lot of the things that we were talking, they were reflecting on their own actions, and they were actually coming to realization that how they overcome it. For example, Bethany, in this image, was describing as a roller coaster, that she goes through it and finds it difficult and takes it time away from her feedback for a very long period, which time that she didn't actually have. And then I was finding it probably is not all bad, because she does come around and she does deal with it and she does make sense of the feedback. And bearing in mind that she was a mature student at the latter part of her educational journey in that institute. Another very interesting reflection was, Isabel's reflection on how she constructed the image in comparison to Clive when they were in the group, when they were discussing. She had chosen a lot more traditional approach that she thought is the correct way of constructing that image, a lot more controlled, probably rigid as she defined it, compared to Clive, that would really putting his ideas down to the paper and really reflect how he feels and how receiving the feedback makes him feel and how he goes through that process. And she was realizing, well, she didn't have to do it, even though I had offered a briefing meeting before the sessions, and that briefing meeting, which was all one-to-one, I explained that there is not a wrong or right answer to this. You can do whatever you prefer, whatever media you would like to choose to construct these images. But yet again, she was kind of a lot more accustomed to make it very rigid and controlled in terms of constructing her images. I found it very interesting that it can be a lot loose, and that was the only time that she could be really express herself in her own way, and just come and discuss it with us in that session. So I think on that note is I've just put some of the references, key references into it for your access later on, and I would stop my sharing my